Welcome to the Hunger for Change podcast. I'm Niklas Gustafsson, and today we have a very special guest, Dr. Anthony Chaffee, who is a highly accomplished American medical doctor, neurosurgical resident, and researcher with over 2 decades of experience in nutrition. He has a passion for researching optimal nutrition for human health and performance and believes that many chronic diseases can be reversed with a proper diet. He studied molecular and cellular biology and obtained an MD certification. He's also a remarkable athlete, played rugby professionally, trained in mixed martial arts, and volunteered as a doctor in refugee camps. Currently, he works as a neurosurgeon at a functional medicine clinic in Australia, remaining dedicated to the carnivore diet. I had a great time talking to Anthony. It was such an enriching conversation. I hope that you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Thank you so much, Anthony, for being with us today.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
So can you tell us, Anthony, a little bit about your background? How did you discover the carnivore diet, and what does health mean to you?
So when I was in college and I was playing rugby, I was an All-American rugby player, and I was very passionate about that and athletics and medicine and biology in general. And so nutrition was just a natural thing for me to study as well. So I studied that at a university level, along with my other training, chemistry, biochemistry, and math. And I was taking, I sort of fell into a carnivore diet very sort of randomly, I guess you would say, because I was taking a cancer biology class and we were actually learning just how toxic plants were because they do use certain toxins to defend themselves from predation. About 80% of the biomass on Earth are plants, and they're under constant assault from animals, insects, and fungus. And so, they have to be able to defend themselves. And one of the main defenses is by having chemical poisons and toxins that can kill you or disrupt your inner workings and metabolism to cause serious harm. And we were learning this from a cancer perspective and looking at things that were carcinogenic. And we found that there were dozens of things that were normal in plants, just naturally occurring in plants that cause harm and damage, but were also shown to be carcinogenic in animals as well. So we learned that Brussels sprouts had 136 identified carcinogens in them. Mushrooms had over 100, and that all the other produce that we get in the stores had dozens, if not over 100 carcinogens that had already been identified, and they were quite abundant. There were found to be 10,000 times more naturally occurring pesticides and insecticides in the produce that we eat versus the pesticides that we spray on them. So 99.99% of pesticides are naturally occurring in the plant as opposed to being put on it by humans. And that in a particular study by Professor Bruce Ames from UC Berkeley, the naturally occurring toxins, like in say mushrooms, were 500 times more likely to cause cancer in mice than Alar, which was the pesticide they were looking at particular study. So we were very, very shocked by that. We were very taken aback. I was very surprised. I remember thinking in my head, I was like, how can this be? I mean, aren't vegetables still good for you? And my professor just looked at us and I felt that he must have read my mind, because as soon as I thought that, he looked at us and he said, I don't eat salad. I don't eat vegetables. I don't let my kids eat vegetables. Plants are trying to kill you. So right, okay, I'm just going to stop eating plants. And so I naturally went to a carnivore diet. I went to the store, just everything had plants or plant products. And I was like, okay, I don't know what to eat. And I just found eggs and meat. And that's what I ate for a number of years after that. And I just felt absolutely amazing. My performance athletically, intellectually, and academically just went through the roof. I felt much, much better, had much better energy, much more mental clarity. And I just improved in so many different ways. And I slipped off of that sort of 5-6 years later when I was living and playing rugby in England, and I stopped feeling great. And I remember thinking, why don't I feel as just superhuman amazing as I normally do? And I couldn't really figure that out. But looking back, that was when I started slipping off of the diet. And 5-6 years earlier, 5 or 6 years ago, I came across some information showing that biologically, humans actually are carnivores. That's actually the kind of animal that we are. And I looked back at that time when I never felt better during that 5 years, and I said, that was it. That makes sense. We are carnivores biologically, and I was living as a carnivore. I was giving my body exactly what it needed and not all this other stuff. And so I was like, right, I knew it. I knew plants were trying to kill me, get rid of these stupid vegetables. And I went back to the pure carnivore diet and then really started digging into the research. I'd since graduated medical school and was practicing as a doctor and had just come back from Bangladesh doing humanitarian in the refugee camps there. And I just went full force into the literature, trying to find out what we knew and what we could prove. And
that is so interesting what you said about the plants trying to I mean, they're toxic, right? And all these all these but that causes cancer, not just for us, with all mammals, right? I find that so interesting. I also heard that the plants, they have had 800 million years to figure out how to do that, right? How to defend themselves.
Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, all these, everything alive is battle tested and hardened through the gauntlet of evolution, right? And so everything that's alive now, is alive for a reason. If they didn't to defend themselves, they would have been eaten to extinction.
Wouldn't be here, right?
Yeah, exactly. So 97% of species of life are extinct now, right? So and these things, like these different trees, I mean, some of these things are hundreds of millions of years old. They have withstood the test of time
for a reason.
Very, very good reason for that.
Yeah. So you've been on a carnivore diet about 20 years, is that right?
Yeah, started 23 years ago with that class in cancer biology, and always been very meat based. Just naturally loved meat and always wanted to eat meat. That was always my go-to. And even in sports and athletics, when they would say, "Oh, you have to carbo load," I just never really felt great doing that, and so I just naturally just stayed away from it. I was lucky in that sense, but I never got sucked into that whole mindset of, "Oh, you have to eat all these and carbo load and all that sort of stuff." I remember doing it a couple of times and I just felt sluggish and not that great the next day. I'm not going to do that. In fact, I felt better when I fasted the day of a game, even if it was a nighttime game, or even not having dinner the night before. I would sort of like a late lunch or an early dinner and then like not have anything at night. I would always feel much better the next day. So it was almost like an intermittent fasting without realizing what I was doing. I was just going by what my body was telling me and how I naturally felt. And so then like 5 years of just solid meat and water, and that's it. And some milk sometimes, that was it. And then after that, I sort of slipped off of it, but it was really minor. I was still very, very focused on meat and still very hesitant and wary of plants, even though it was just, "Oh, you have to have this." And I was like, "Well, do you really? I mean, they have carcinogens, they have all these things other than that. So just because they have good things doesn't mean they don't have bad things." I mean, people can cherry pick and say, "Oh, you have to eat mushrooms because they have anti-VEGF and that's good in fighting cancer." And it's like, okay, have cancer. If you don't, I don't see why you really want to be taking a chemotherapy agent, which is exactly what you use anti-VEGF for, is actually in chemo. And I don't think anyone's arguing that chemo is a good idea if you don't have cancer. I certainly wouldn't recommend it. And so I remember thinking that, I was like, that doesn't really make sense to me, because maybe there's some beneficial things, just like any medicine, something that can provide a benefit at some point. But if you don't have that issue, then you don't get a benefit from it, right? If you don't have an infection, then there's no point in taking antibiotics, right? You don't just take antibiotics for this; it can cause harm, right? And so the same thing with these plants. Maybe in certain circumstances they will provide more of a benefit, but in other circumstances they'll cause harm, and they also come with things that cause harm on top of that. It really made sense to me. And then 6 years ago, I just stopped cold again, and I haven't had anything from plant or fungus kingdoms. Sometimes I'll put a bit of seasoning if I'm at a restaurant, but I don't put seasonings on myself.
Okay, interesting. Could you tell me about your morning routine? What do you do in the mornings? Do you have breakfast? Do you work out? What does it look like?
Mornings, I normally I'm not hungry in the mornings. Normally, if you're eating high density nutrition, you don't need to eat as much or as often. And so I find that I'm usually just hungry once a day. And so I'll eat a large meal at night, and then I won't be hungry in the morning. And so I usually just get up in the morning and, try to get, a bit of like a cold shower or something like that, get some sun exposure if I can. But really what I'm doing is I'm trying to, get to work as soon as possible, because I tend to work so much. I generally get little sleep. So I try to maximize that. So I'm usually in a rush in the morning. And that's really beneficial that I eat this way, because I don't need to eat in the morning. I don't have to have breakfast. I can get up, shower, get out of the house. And helpful for me. I generally don't need to eat lunch. I just work all day. After work, if I have time, I'll try to go to the gym. I don't always have time to, though. And then I'll do work from home. I have a lot of side projects that I do, like my podcast and writing a book and other things as well. So I generally work on those in the evening and then have a big steak. And then that's it for the day.
So that's the only meal that you have
Quite often. Yeah.
in
Sometimes
the evening.
Yeah, if I'm working out a lot and if I'm to steadily make it to the gym, then I'll usually be more hungry than that. So I'll have to eat sort of twice a day. And so I'll try to, sometimes I'll eat basically as much as I can at night, and then I always try to have leftovers. I always want to satiate or saturate my body's desire for food, and so I eat to the point that I really don't want to eat anymore. And that is indicative if you want to leave leftovers. If I get to the end of a steak and go like, that was really good, that probably means that my body wants more. I go by taste. Things taste good. You get a positive feedback when your body wants those nutrients. And then your body doesn't want those nutrients, then it starts giving less of a positive feedback and even sometimes a negative feedback. And you just naturally want to stop. That can be deranged by eating carbohydrates, sugar, alcohol, taking different medications and some other things as well can influence that. However, if you're just eating a natural carnivore diet, generally you can listen to your hunger signals.
Sure,
and so
sure.
I'll leave those leftovers, and then maybe in the morning be like, those look good, and I'll just polish them.
So when you say that you have that dinner at night, how late is that? How many hours before going to sleep?
Quite often it'll just be right when I get home, like right when I'm back from the gym or back from work. And then it might be a few hours before I go to sleep. I generally don't worry about eating right before bed, though. From what I can see, it's really only an issue eating before bed if you're eating carbohydrates, mainly because it disrupts your growth hormone production and utilization. So carbohydrates is insulin, obviously, and insulin actually blocks growth hormone release and the actions of growth hormone, which is a vital hormone. We release growth hormone in a pulsatile manner throughout the day, usually around every sort of 90 minutes, 60 to 90 minutes, depending on if you're a man or a woman. And men do it a bit more often, but in lower doses. Women do it a bit more spaced out, but slightly higher doses. You generally get around the same amount. And then your biggest doses come about 2 hours after you go to sleep, but really 2 hours after you're supposed to go to sleep, because your circadian rhythm in a very specific way, and your hormones get sort of released in this certain sort of diurnal pattern.
Do you mean 2 hours after you fall asleep?
Yes. Yeah. But really, like 2 hours after your body wants you to have fallen asleep. So according to your rhythm, you should sort of be asleep at a certain time. 2 hours after that point, you will release a big hit of growth hormone if you're asleep. But this is something that can be a problem, because if you go to sleep sort of an hour or two late, or 2 hours later than your sort of body's set up to go to sleep, you actually miss out on that big hit of growth hormone, and you won't get it. So it won't just happen 2 hours after you go to sleep, no matter what. If you go to sleep late, you'll miss it. And so they're actually very, very important for hormonal health. And eating carbohydrates really disrupts that. So eating carbohydrates throughout the day will disrupt that as well. You have this pulsatile release of growth hormone. Or if you go to the gym and you work out, do a heavy leg session or lifting session, you'll release more growth hormone. And if you're eating a whole bunch of carbs, and a lot of these guys in the gym, this is actually something that's very counterproductive. These guys that want to bulk up and get really big, they eat all these carbs. They're actually blocking their own body's ability to make and utilize growth hormone. And so that's not really getting where they want to go. And so if you're doing that right before you go to sleep, your insulin's going to be up. You're going to miss out on that big hit of growth hormone as well.
Yeah, yeah. There's this conversation about blood work markers between, comparing people that are on a carnivore diet and people that are on a normal Western diet, right? And people on a carnivore diet, they tend to have a higher LDL than others. What do you say about this? Is this do you agree? Is it right? And is it dangerous?
Yeah, quite often your LDL will go up, but if you fast for 24, 48 hours, your LDL also goes up. So what is that about? So it's not just because you're eating saturated fat, your LDL goes up. Really, what it's about is you're running on fat now, and LDL is just a carrier molecule and is just transporting fat and nutrients to and from the liver, and that's what it does. That's what it's supposed to do. You make it. This is normal, right? So if you eat no saturated fat at all, if you eat no cholesterol at all, if you even fast, if you don't eat anything at all, your LDL goes up, right? Because it's just a transport molecule. It's not actually this horrible disease molecule. Oh my God, you've eaten fat, and now this plague is racking your body. That's not the case. LDL is actually a very important molecule. You have to have it. You'll not function well without it. And so you can actually die, without it. There's sort of a U-shaped pattern, even that the people that say LDL is the worst thing ever, that they recognize you go too low, death rate spikes up, and so no, the idea that LDL is bad for you has been roundly discredited. And that's not something that everybody knows yet. That's not something that every doctor or cardiologist knows, but it is getting out there. It is in the literature. It is in the historical record that these studies that vilified LDL and saturated fat were actually fraudulent. They were bought and paid for by the sugar companies. The Journal of the American Medical Association published a paper out of UC San Francisco in 2016, where they had actual internal memos from the sugar companies back in the 60s detailing how they paid off 3 Harvard professors to falsify data and publish fraudulent studies to make it appear as if cholesterol caused heart disease and to rate sugar, because there was actually that was the fight. Is it sugar? Is it cholesterol? And there were plenty of studies showing a very strong correlation between increased consumption of sugar and heart disease, which is a brand new disease. It had never really existed in any real numbers before the 20th century. And one of those professors was named head of the USDA, and it was he who authored and published the 1977 USDA declaration saying that cholesterol causes heart disease, saturated fat increases cholesterol, stop eating both. Well, they should tell you to stop fasting too, because that increases LDL cholesterol. But we've actually seen in multiple studies that fasting confers excellent health benefits as well. So that's a bit that they have to deal with.
And still it is the mainstream opinion, right? That LDL is the bad cholesterol, and the LDL, the higher the LDL, the worse for your health, right?
I think it's 50-50, because it depends on who you talk to, because there's a ton of doctors and cardiologists. Some of the top cardiologists are just publishing tons and tons and tons of data and books and literature just on the fact that this is not what we have thought. So I think it is, yes, still the mainstream opinion, but it shouldn't be. It's just because
hopefully it's changing, right?
Read the literature. Yeah, well, it is changing. Yeah, most people are coming around to this and understanding that that was all a fraud, and the literature is certainly out there. The information is certainly out there and available. It's just a matter of time before people come across it. But things are still heavily influenced by the food drug companies, and in these medical schools, top medical schools, a lot of these professors are on the payroll of the pharmaceutical companies. There was a scandal with Harvard last year where a girl asked about the side effects of statins, because this professor was talking about how just statins are these wonder drugs, it's the best thing ever, and just talking about all the good things. She just asked us, okay, are there any side effects to statins as well? And apparently the professor just ridiculed her in the middle of class, which is really inappropriate for a professor to do in the first place when you ask a question. It's a legitimate question. All drugs have side effects.
Totally. Yeah.
And so that kind of pissed her off. And she looked into it and found out that he was on the pay of like 17 different drug companies. And she's like, the hell is this? It's a conflict of interest. And Harvard got a very low, actually, they got an F grade rating on their conflicts of interest with their professors of medicine and their sort of commercial ties. So unfortunately, there's a strong influence there, but more and more people are coming around to it. Even doctors and medical students are contacting me and saying, wow, it's really great to see this. It's great to see this literature. And so they're starting off on the right foot, understanding that's going to change the landscape significantly.
What is your take on statins, by the way? Are statins, are there any people that should take statins?
There are probably a small subset of people who do benefit from statins. There was a paper that just got published by Dr. Paul Mason, Professor Ben Bickman out of BYU, and Dr. Diamond, basically showing, doing a large literature review and arguing sort of a position paper literature review, arguing that if you're on a ketogenic diet, that you don't need to be on a statin. It doesn't matter what your LDL cholesterol is, that your HDL is going to be up, your triglycerides are going to be low, you're going to be very, very low risk group. There's also quite a lot of people that have considered normal LDL cholesterol on a carnivore diet, on a high fat diet. There can be sort of a transition period, but that after a few years on this, my LDL was sort of just in the high, just above the normal range, but I mean, just barely. And, seeing is that we look at this reference range in the light of LDL being bad and causing heart disease, and it doesn't, then I think we need to rethink those reference ranges as well. So who knows what the reference range is supposed to be. But my HDL was very high, which actually we do have very good evidence to say that if your HDL is very high and your triglycerides are very low, that you have an extremely low risk of heart disease. So if you to try to get like your HDL to triglycerides ratio, if that's 1-to-1, you're doing very well. That's 2-to-1, like you have twice as much HDL as triglycerides, you're extremely low risk for heart disease. Mine was 3-to-1.
3-to-1.
3 times the amount of HDL as I did triglycerides. So I'm in an extremely low.
Yeah. Mine is about 2.5 to 1.
Yeah. Well, that is excellent. So it really doesn't matter what your LDL is in that case. Right. Some people think that statins, because they have a sort of an anti-inflammatory effect, that this is probably what's causing more of the benefit as opposed to the cholesterol reducing aspect of it. So it's not really clear, but we do know that people who have had heart attacks, have had some sort of cardiac event, they, will get more benefit from statins. But, you have to sort of ask yourself, how much benefit they're getting and at what cost, because these things are expensive and they do have side effects that can be harmful, like anything else. And if you look at the numbers, if you're looking at how long this will extend someone's life, that's really what we're talking about here. You're trying to prevent someone from dying of a heart attack or a stroke. That going on, so someone who's had a cardiac event and goes on a statin, they, on average, increase their life expectancy by 5 days.
With days, yeah, I saw that. Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah.
And if you haven't had a cardiac event, on average, 3 days. So, are those 5 days worth it to you? I mean, if you could, most people are going to be, okay, please give me 5 days of that, with my family, I'm sure. But, average, this is just, it's not that much. And you're being on a drug for decades, and that's going to be expensive and it's going to have side effects. So that there are going to be people that can benefit in certain circumstances, but they have to sort of decide if that benefit.
Consider the side effects.
Yeah, exactly, and also consider dietary changes that can have a much greater influence and effect.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I get a lot of questions about seed oils, and I mean lately we see there is a debate about seed oils, and a lot of people ask me how can seed oil be bad to? I mean they're made out of seeds, and seeds they're natural. So what is it? What would you say? What is it that makes a seed oil that bad?
So, whenever anyone says, well, but it's natural, how can it be bad for you? I always point out that arsenic is natural too. Like this,
Yeah.
this is most things in nature will kill you. I mean that's nature is wild. It's kill or
Yeah.
be killed. In fact, most things on this earth will kill us, and that's like plants in general make roughly 1 million different defense chemicals, most of which will kill you dead. That's why if you go lost in the woods and you run out of food, you can't just eat any random plant because most of them will make you very, very sick or even kill you. Those are those defense chemicals. Defense chemicals also exist in seeds and nuts and grains and legumes because all organisms protect their babies more than anything. And a seed is a plant's baby. A seed, nut, grain, legumes, beans, all of these things are seeds. And so this is where you'll generally find the highest concentration of poisons. So, I mean, there's like in castor beans, all beans are good for you. Okay. Well, even the WHO has a website on natural toxins in food, in plants, right? And that you have to be able to prepare these things to detoxify them or just avoid in general. So 5 kidney beans, uncooked or undercooked, actually undercooking kidney beans can actually be worse than just not cooking them at all. But 5 of these things are enough to put you in the hospital and be very, very sick, right? So 10 might even be fatal, right? So that's very toxic, right? We can cook these things and denature some of them, but not all of them are heat sensitive, right? Look at ricin, which is in castor beans. This is the most poisonous substance that we know of, and it's used in sort of assassination attempts and things like that. Yeah. This is very toxic stuff. It gets on you, just even gets on your skin. It will kill you invariably. We don't have any antidote to it. It is invariably fatal. This is a toxin that is in the seed of that plant, right? So obviously almonds aren't in that category, but almonds do have defense chemicals in them, like cyanide. They have these cyanogenic glycosides that when they're crushed, they release cyanide. And that's clearly defending against something eating it, right? The crush mechanism, something chewing it, macerating it with their teeth, and that triggers the release of cyanide into that animal who's now trying to eat it. So things like cassava melons, or sorry, not cassava melons, but cassava root, they have cyanide in it. So there's sweet cassava, which has less cyanide, and bitter cassava, which has a lot more cyanide. And that, if not properly treated, will kill you with the amount of cyanide that it has. And so almonds have cyanide as well. And 400 to 800 grams of almonds can be a lethal dose of cyanide in an adult. Now you have to chew them and all that sort of stuff, but that is inherent in that seed. So look at like in the inside of a peach pit, like a stone of a peach or a nectarine or something like that. You crack that open, it looks like there's a little almond in there, right? Because like nuts, how hard that shell is. Like a walnut has this hard shell. Almonds have these hard shells. We crack it, we get into that seed. You can do that with a peach pit as well, and it has a little seed that looks like an almond. It's called a bitter almond, and that has so much cyanide that 1 or 2 of those can kill you with the amount of cyanide that it has. And so that's true of all seeds and nuts and all these sorts of things. They'll have generally more toxins in there. And while they may have other things, that are beneficial, they also have toxins. Seed oils in particular are a bit of an issue because as soon as you take the oil out of the plant, it actually becomes very unstable and it starts breaking down into harmful components. And those components can be very oxidative and cause a lot of oxidative stress. And we have these free radicals that these things cause. You want to take antioxidants. Okay, well, these are the oxidants. These are the things that antioxidants fight. They also have a lot of omega-6 versus omega-3, so much, much higher omega-6 than omega-3, which is also pro-inflammatory as well. The breakdown products can be quite harmful, especially if you cook with them, because every 10 degrees Celsius, you increase the heat of a reaction, you double the reaction rate. So you increase the reaction rate and break down into these toxic or more harmful byproducts in seed oils by millions of times just by cooking with them. So they can be quite harmful there. So there's other things going on in the seed oils than just the oil itself. Maybe there are some fatty acids in there that are good for us, right? But there are other things that come along with it. Like canola oil used to be rapeseed oil. Rapeseed oil was deemed unfit for human consumption because it was so toxic. These were all invented as industrial lubricants, and so, which is neither here nor there, but that is the origin. They were invented for that, to be a cheap way of lubricating machines after we sort of ran out of whales to use.
Yeah.
And so we started using these industrial seed oils. It's a very, very labor, sort of technology and industrially intensive process to extract these things. And we're using them as lubricants. We're never using them for human consumption. Then they said, hey, we can just sort of start making people eat this stuff. And get these trans fats, and it spreads like butter. Oh, and it's even better for you. I mean, they tried to put that on people, which is just ridiculous. But so these things came on, and they found that like rapeseed oil was extremely toxic. It was very, very, very poisonous. And so now they had this canola oil, which is the same stuff. It's just less of it. So, but it still has some of these toxic elements and components in there. So there's definitely something harmful in there. Whether it's the worst thing ever or not. I mean, it's certainly not something that you'd want to put in your body. I mean, think of it this way. Our biology is set up, really hasn't changed genetically for the last 300,000 years. So, whatever we're supposed to eat, whatever we're designed to eat, we certainly weren't designed to eat something that didn't exist 100 years ago and didn't exist 50,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Or years ago, when we were evolving, when we were eating the thing that propelled our evolution to what it is in its current form. So if something didn't exist 50,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago, you shouldn't be eating it. So seed oils are certainly part of that. And there's actually, if you look at a graph of the increased levels of consumption of seed oils in America and around the world, it perfectly correlates to the rise in heart disease. So does sugar.
Yeah. So if you've been on the typical Western diet, having had seed oils for years, maybe for decades, how long would you have to be on a more Paleolithic diet to actually get that toxic out of your body? How long does it take, to get that out of your cells?
That's a very good question. I don't think I know the answer fully, but whatever it is, it's good to stop it now. There's never a bad to stop eating poison, and you're right, it would take a while to sort of get this stuff out of your system. So the best time to start is now, and just start that process and just get it out.
And get it out, yeah. And what about this generation that have been consuming seed oils for decades? What would be the outcome?
We're certainly seeing a lot of increases in metabolic diseases and chronic diseases. How much of that is to do with seed oils or sugar or processed foods in general, or the combination thereof of not eating what we're supposed to eat, is anybody's guess. But I think they're all contributory. And since we've radically upset how people have lived since the 1970s, the health of the world has significantly declined. It started in America in 1977. Like I said, the USDA said cholesterol causes heart disease, stop eating it. People did. They started listening to this. And so because eggs and meat had a lot of cholesterol and saturated fat, especially red meat, they said, okay, we're really going to get away from that. If you look at the consumption data in America of what people are actually consuming, we have cut our intake of red meat by more than a third since 1970, and we've increased high fructose corn syrup and seed oils by over triple. So we've over tripled the amount.
I've seen that even chicken and pork has increased, at least chicken.
We've increased chicken, yeah. So we're eating a similar amount of meat, actually a bit less, but similar amount. We replaced basically red meat with chicken. So like I remember when I was a kid, we would eat a lot of chicken and really go for like white meat and things like that, and take the skin off, even though that was the best part. And and so that's what happened there, because people were still eating meat, but they were just, okay, we want to stay away from the fat and the cholesterol. So people were sort of getting rid of eggs, getting rid of red meat for those reasons. And so people blame red meat and they blame eggs and blame all those things, but you really can't, because in that time we've cut red meat and eggs, well, red meat in particular, by over a third. Heart disease rates have tripled, right? So you can't blame that on red meat or cholesterol, because in America we did this, but the rest of the world has followed suit subsequently. And in every country that have adopted these guidelines and followed their directions, they've had the same outcomes. So in America, we've reduced our fat and cholesterol intake by a third, reduced red meat by over a third, increased fruits and vegetables by 30 and 40% respectively, increased fructose seed oil by 3 times.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And things like that. And what were the results? The obesity rate tripled, stroke rate tripled, cancer rate tripled, disease tripled, type 2 diabetes disorders, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, even neurodevelopmental delays such as autism all increased exponentially. They almost didn't exist before then. Now they're the majority of things that we treat. And so whatever we're doing something very wrong. This is not genetic.
In the US, I saw that 93% of the population has some kind of metabolic disease. 93%.
Yeah. And 70% are overweight or obese. Yeah. And in 1980, it was 8%. Right. And after World War II, it was 6%. So this new generation, we had this, I forget exactly where she's from, but she was appointed to some sort of health ministry role in America. And she said that no, obesity is purely genetic. There's nothing you can do about it. Don't worry about it. Just eat whatever garbage you want, smoke, drink, be married. It doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter, because if your parents are overweight, then you are 50 to 80%. You have a 50 to 80% likelihood of overweight. So therefore, it's genetic. I'm sorry. Who cooks the meals in the household? The adult. And so the kids are eating what the adults eat, right? And so if the adults are eating things that make them overweight, obviously the kids are going to get overweight as well. So, and that wouldn't track either, because our genetics didn't just completely change as a planet and a species in the last 40 years. The obesity rate was 6% after World War II, 8% in 1980, 24% now, 70% are overweight or obese, and it's more in other countries as well. And generally, it was around 6% before that, and that's changed dramatically.
That's horrible. Anthony, I think that you do a great job explaining how many of these conditions are not actually chronic issues, but they are toxicities. How do you explain this?
Yeah, well, I think that's sort of my overarching theme is that I don't think that these diseases are diseases per se, but toxicities and malnutrition. So toxic buildup of a species inappropriate diet and lack of species specific nutrition, namely too many plants that we didn't evolve to eat and don't have the necessary equipment and enzymes to break down and detoxify safely, and not eating a fatty red meat, which is what we evolved on, is what our bodies are designed to eat naturally. And as you get away from this, as you go further and further away from what we are naturally designed to eat, our health, there are serious health ramifications. I mean, this was well studied, well documented, going back, hundreds of years. The Weston A. Price, there's a Weston A. Price Foundation and all these different sort of Price Pottinger and things like that are still alive today. He was a dentist that traveled around looking at different indigenous tribes that were just eating mostly meat, and they had perfectly formed teeth, perfectly formed jaws, big wide jaws, and they erupted wisdom teeth. They weren't getting dental caries and cavities. And he was like, what is going on here? And he found that it was nutritional. He found that these populations, when they were eating this meat-based diet, they would have very, very healthy teeth, and other populations were eating more plant-based. They get quite damaged teeth. There was a study out of Harvard a century ago that was looking at that as well with the Inuit in northern Canada, and contrasting that with population down in Yucatan, where they were eating more of a plant-based diet. Found that all the teeth that were sort of cast in a mold of the Inuit were like perfect. They basically said there was nearly 1,000 of these things that were perfect teeth. And so the professor of dentistry at Harvard said, I've maybe seen 10 perfect teeth in my entire career, and every single one of these except 2 were perfect out of nearly 1,000. and that the ones from contrasted with the Yucatan, they were just diseased and horrible, crooked and misformed. That's something that we know now in dentistry journals now, is that crooked teeth and micrognathia, smaller jaw, or even just not even micrognathia, but just a smaller jaw, an underdeveloped jaw, is actually nutritional. You're not getting enough of proper nutrients, such as like K2, which only exists in meat, and you can't get it. You can't get it elsewhere. So there are a lot of these things that I think are purely nutritional, but we're treating them as if they're diseases. So we need to find a cure for this disease, find a pill for this disease. But I don't think anyone would be foolish enough to think that diabetes is caused by a metformin deficiency. You have a deficiency in metformin, you have to take this thing, or that heart disease is from a statin deficiency. You know, that your just requires this essential statin, and you just don't take it, like some sort of genetic disease, like some you're not producing some enzyme that your body. That's not the case, obviously, and it's not a communicable disease. It's not something that you can catch from people, and yet animals, when we feed them grain and processed foods, they get the same diseases. And veterinarians are saying that now domesticated pets they're seeing an upsurge in human diseases, right? Yeah. And that's interesting. It must be from this intensive breeding. I was like, well, why would that matter? Zookeepers will tell you the same thing. If you fed them grain and kibble like you'd feed a dog, these animals in the zoo would get human diseases. Like, you would never do that. That's why they are very, very careful with what they feed animals in the zoo. They only feed them what they would eat in the wild. And that's why there's signs at the zoo that say, don't feed the animals. It will make them sick if they don't eat what they're normally supposed to eat. Same signs at the park. Don't feed the animals. This makes them sick. Don't feed the animal what you're eating yourself. So what is that doing to you? Yeah. It's doing the same thing. So these so-called human diseases were used to be called the diseases of the West. When Western populations from Europe would go to the Americas or Australia, they found that the natives there were essentially just eating meat, and they were not getting these diseases of the West. No. And then when they started being incorporated into Western society, they started eating Western foods, they started getting these diseases of the West, which are now just called getting older. This is just called normal. And now we're this human diseases in animals. I think it's time that we wake up and recognize, like, no, this is the same thing. It's just a pattern over centuries that we can track. Totally. And that's what it is. We have entire fields of veterinary medicine, especially with livestock, because livestock animal nutrition is actually a really robust science. Human nutrition is garbage, but animal nutrition, you can actually run very, very robust experiments, randomized controlled trials throughout the entire life cycle of an animal with thousands of animals. And you can do this multiple times to really show very good results. So we actually have great science on animal nutrition, and some of that can be sort of translated to humans. And one of the main things is that you feed animals some things that they don't normally eat, they get sick. And so in fact, you get into different plants, and specifically plants, they eat plants they don't normally eat, they will get sick, they will get hurt. Normally this doesn't happen in the wild, because an animal can just forage and find what it wants. But if it's stuck in a pasture and it's sort of stuck there, and it's just sort of, I really want to eat something, and sort of run out of forage, they might think that they wouldn't normally sit. And so there are diseases that are called that are named for these animals eating specific plants. A big head, limp neck, big tongue, crazy cow syndrome. All of these things are describing a disorder that happens when an animal eats something that's not supposed to and gets poisoned, basically. And I think we need to be recognizing as doctors and as people that things like diabetes, heart disease, even cancer, autoimmune disorders, etc., are the same as crazy cow syndrome and big head and limp neck, and that these are toxicities from eating the wrong thing and not actually diseases.
Right. And also, if you've been on a plant-based diet for long, and you've been consuming excessive fiber, a lot of these people, they're suffering from gut issues such as SIBO, IBS. What do you think? I mean, what is the right thing for them to do? Should they just immediately from one day to another stop, eat what they're doing, and turn on to going for a carnivore diet? Or should they little by little introduce more meat, more protein, more fat, and less of these excessive fiber food?
I think if they're able to, that it would be great to just get rid of all of that. I know many long-term vegans that have just done that, and they've done very well with that. As I said earlier, I don't think there's ever a bad time to stop eating poison. And some things, like if you have like alcoholic dependency or benzodiazepines and you stop that immediately, you can have serious withdrawals or even seizures that could be dangerous. You would need to sort of wean yourself off of it. But I think as far as these plant toxins are concerned, and certainly fiber, I think you benefit immediately by getting rid of that stuff. And some people, they've been eating a vegan or vegetarian diet for a long time. It might be hard to transition. They might feel weird about it, and maybe they need to go a bit slower. But I think as far as health is concerned, if they're able to just go cold turkey and go straight into a meat-based diet, I think that's the best.
And what about the autoimmune disease? For example, vitiligo, or the vitiligo, Hashimoto's, all these autoimmune diseases. What is your take on them and the carnivore diet? Can they be cured by the carnivore diet?
Yeah, so I think that's the thing. I think that this is a perfect example of what we were talking about earlier about these not really being diseases at all, but toxicities. And if you have a toxic exposure and you develop a toxicity, the treatment for that is not some crazy pill that sort of mitigates that in a way. The main thing is to get rid of the toxin and make sure that your environment. If you have lead pipes in your house and you're getting lead poisoning, you can take a chelating agent, sort of mitigate that. But really you need to just get new pipes, right? You need to get rid of that lead exposure. So autoimmune diseases seem to really fit that pattern very, very well, because when you remove these insults and just go on like a pure elimination, you can even think of it as an elimination diet. You've eliminated out all of these different plant toxins and different processed foods and garbage. And now you're just getting the nutrients that you need, which is what meat is, because humans are carnivores. We've developed as carnivores, evolved as carnivores, and lived as carnivores for the last 2 to 3 million years. That's what all the best evidence in paleontology and paleoanthropology have shown us. And so when you get that and you eliminate all these things out, these autoimmune issues they really just go away. And so that's really indicative that this is a cause and effect relationship. It is a toxicity relationship, and you remove that toxicity or toxin, you fix the toxicity. So in that sense, yes, I do think you can cure it, because just how you would cure lead poisoning by getting rid of the lead pipes, it will go away. There are studies with this. This is not just conjecture. This is not just observation. I have certainly seen this in hundreds of people. I have many patients that have had Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, vitiligo, rheumatoid arthritis, even MS, and so many others. I've yet to see an autoimmune issue not respond very well to an elimination diet like carnivore diet, especially carnivore diet. And even vitiligo, where people are losing patches of their melanin and their skin, it goes very, very white.
Yeah,
that actually fills back in. Surprisingly, those melanocytes are clearly not all the way dead. They're just severely, diminished. And then that can actually fill in, and they can actually get normal pigmentation after a while. Maybe not perfectly. Maybe some of those things have died, but a lot of people are finding it, it fills in really well. There are studies in the literature already, before, without even mentioning a carnivore diet, they found that putting people on like a really strict elimination diet, like it's called an elemental diet, which is very processed. It's in a can. It's like it's like a protein shake that you would take out, but it has all the nutrients that are deemed essential for humans. Now, there's more that we don't know of, but this has basically all the ones that we know of, right? So all the protein and fat and vitamins and minerals and everything like that. You have this shake and you eat it, right? And you have nothing else. It only has nutrients. It doesn't have anything else. And there are studies showing that that put on this elemental diet, that is a better treatment to get people out of an acute flare-up of Crohn's disease than putting them on steroids. which is heretofore thought to be like that's the mainstay treatment. Is you have a bad flare up, you put them on steroids for a couple of days, and you put them on all these disease modifying agents like biologicals that cost thousands and thousands of dollars a week and have horrible side effects on your body. Steroids cause havoc on your body, and none of those are as good as just putting them on an elimination diet. And that's been shown clearly in the literature. There was also a randomized control trial looking at ketogenic diet with removing fiber, because obviously you can have fiber in a ketogenic diet, but this one specifically removed fiber and all carbohydrates. And they contrasted that with ones that kept in using carbohydrates and fiber. And the treatment group, the intervention group that was on keto without any fiber, found that they could keep people with Crohn's in remission on average 51 months, right? So years and years and years in remission by just going on keto, not eating fiber. Contrasted that with the carbohydrate and fiber group, stayed in remission on average of 0 months. So, it was a very, very stark contrast.
You being an athlete, what is? I mean, there was a podcast I listened to. You were talking about the body's ability to burn fat, and that when you're in a typical Western diet for some time, your body doesn't really since it never burns fat. You're constantly on carbs, glucose. So your body doesn't actually know how to burn fat. But as soon as you start with the carnivore diet and you're on ketosis, etc., then the switch from carbs to fat is much more smooth. And actually, I noticed that myself, because when running marathons and even Ironmans, there is a huge difference when you hit the wall. That wall is not that it's much more smooth. Your body knows how to switch when there's no more glycogen in your body. That's not this huge gap, right? And I think that's super interesting. Could you just let us know what is your take on that? When your body knows how to burn fat, what is it that happens in your body?
Yeah, it mostly comes down to insulin. Insulin, when it's too high, you have a hyperinsulinemic state, which basically when you eat any carbohydrates, it's going to do that. It completely derails the normal workings of your metabolism. When I was taking biochemistry, we learned this as a fed state. You eat carbohydrate or you just eat in general, and your insulin's up and has these sort of waves of blood sugar and insulin. And this is how your biochemistry works. This is how your body works. And then when you stop eating for 24 hours, it changes. And now through gluconeogenesis, you make blood sugar, liver glycogen, muscle glycogen, ketones, and your body works in a different way. They fail to mention that if you eat anything besides carbohydrates at all, it also looks like that so-called fasting state. So I eat 5,000 calories in ribeye. I am not fasting. That is not a fasting metabolism. I argue that's our primary metabolic state. That's the primary metabolic state of nearly all animals in the wild that I know of. And so I think that the only reason we call one that a fed state and the other a fasting state, I think erroneously, is because by the time we were able to look at biochemistry at a molecular level, everyone was eating carbohydrates. So they just say, okay, when you eat, it looks like this. When you don't eat, it looks like that. Not realizing that it's really just only when you eat carbohydrates does it look like a so-called fed state. And so that disruption in your metabolism has massive, massive ramifications, especially for athletics. When you eat carbohydrates, your blood sugar goes up. That is harmful to you. Those little glucose molecules, when they get high enough, they can actually physically fuse to other molecules called glycation. So it's a non-enzymatic binding of that sugar molecule to other molecules. It damages them irreversibly. So this is what kills diabetics. It sort of breaks you down from the inside, and your body can't repair and replace these things fast enough sometimes. And so you die young and you get very sick. So your body looks at that as obviously a bad thing. So it raises up your insulin, I think, in a protective manner. Insulin, basically, you can think of it as insulin forces energy into cells. It doesn't allow it to come out of cells. It blocks lipolysis. It blocks proteolysis. So it's just forcing this excess glucose into your cells. And now it's in your cells, it's in your fat cells, and it's stuck there. It can't then burn it for fat. So when your insulin is high, you can think of it as being in a fat storage metabolism as opposed to a fat burning metabolism. And you'll throw protein into your muscles as well. Some people try to supplement with insulin, like bodybuilders, thinking that this is going to make them just stuff a lot of energy and protein into their muscles. I don't think it's a very good idea. I think it's actually extremely dangerous. And I'm just not convinced that it's actually providing any benefit at all. So like you say, when you're eating carbohydrates and your insulin's high, you're only running on your glycogen. You only have a couple hours of glycogen, even if you do carbo load. And this is why, people before an Ironman or a marathon, they carbo load before to try to give themselves energy for the race. Invariably, they're going to hit the wall. Invariably, they're going to run out of that glycogen and they're just going to be stuck. And their insulin's going to stay up because it normally stays up for about 24 hours. And now they're fighting against it. Most people stop at that, but people like yourself and other performance athletes, and high performance endurance athletes know that if they keep pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing, eventually they'll break through the wall. Yeah. They'll get to the other side and they'll get their runner's high and their second one just feel amazing, and you can just go and go and go. What that is biochemically is you're forcing your body to switch over and start producing energy from fat stores like you would in ketosis. And so now you're mobilizing your fat stores, you're making glycogen, you're making blood sugar, you're making ketones, and you just feel alive. But if you're in ketosis or you're on a carnivore diet or even just a ketogenic diet, you will always be in your second wind. You will always be in that through the wall sort of metabolism. So I find that it's much better. And now you're locking into your fat stores, which even a very, very slender person will have weeks of energy available to them if they didn't even eat at all. And so you're definitely through a marathon or an Ironman with just double energy. And some people think, well, I have to eat during or I'll run out of energy. I'm like, well, you're just gonna die. You just won't have energy and just no. What they're saying is they're gonna run out of glycogen, and they'll hit. So they have to keep giving themselves sugar so that they can replenish that glycogen. Well, if you don't eat sugar at all, if you don't eat carbohydrates at all, it's never a problem. You never have to replenish that because you'll always be getting it from your fat stores. There was
surprisingly, most marathon runners and triathletes, they don't know that. They're not aware of that.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Like I found that out just, accidentally when I started doing this, because I just could not run out of energy. The harder I pushed myself, the more I could go. And obviously I had to get in shape. There is a limitation to, the muscles. Yeah. But after I got in like really good shape, I was really pushing myself. I got to the point where I almost couldn't get tired. I couldn't push myself hard enough to ever get tired. I certainly wouldn't run out of it. Yeah. If I got winded or something like that, I just sort of toned it down for a bit. My energy would come back up. I never hit the wall for years.
So you can store about 2,000 to 3,000 calories as glycogen, right? Carbs. While you can store about 70,000 to 80,000 calories as fat, right?
Yeah, or more. There are obviously people that have a lot of excess adipose tissue. They've got a lot more than that. And so, generally, if you look at people like Professor Kim Noakes, who was one of the top exercise physiologists and sports medicine doctors in the world for decades, the big proponent of you have to eat carbs in order to burn carbs, right? But we have studies looking at wolves in 1981 saying that like, oh, well, they don't carbo load before they chase caribou for 10 hours. So, do they have blood sugar and glycogen and everything like that? And they found out, yeah, they do. And it's rock solid. It doesn't change, constantly replenishing it. And so if someone is eating carbohydrates, they'll on average have 3 times more glycogen in their liver and in their muscles than say I would. But mine never goes down. Mine will stay right there. And so I will constantly be replenishing glycogen, and whereas they will eventually run out and it will go away. And so Noakes found in very interesting randomized controlled trials that if you took a bunch of different athletes and you got them keto adapted, fat adapted, and it takes a couple weeks to do that properly. They gave him 42 days just to make sure, but it doesn't take that long. He even said that it doesn't take any more than 3 weeks. And you compare them against athletes that are eating carbohydrates, they're carbo loading. They find that there's no difference in their athletic performance, right?
Yeah.
And then they took them and they switched the groups. So the guys that were keto adapted started eating carbs, and the guys who were eating carbs went and got keto adapted, gave them another 42 days. And then they found, again, exact same exercise output. So there is no reduction in your performance. Say, oh, I have to have carbs or else I'm not going to have a good workout. Nonsense. This is your body makes the carbs and glucose and glycogen and ketones.
Yeah.
So in fact, you're at an advantage. And as Professor Noakes says, you'll run out of glycogen in a couple hours, but you'll be able to tap into your fat forever. And so until you run out of fat, you're not going to run out of energy. And so since you're able to perform at the same level of output, the fat adapted people are actually going to be able to perform at the same level, but they're going to keep going. They're not going to
for much longer. The other day, I saw this article challenging the Blue Zones diet, indicating that their meat intake was actually higher than reported. And I saw that you shared a video about how people who live to a longer age are actually eating a diet based on animal products. So, as an expert, what do you think about this?
So, the Blue Zone studies are very problematic for a lot of different reasons. First of all, I call it a study. It's not a study. It's just an article, really, that someone wrote. But it wasn't that they took all the different studies comparable and studied and focused and found all these little differences. They cherry picked certain areas and then they looked at certain things and they said these places live longer on average than the surrounding populations because they eat more plants. That was their conclusion. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's what it was. There are a lot of other things that go in that. And also a lot of people have pointed out that these areas, they say, oh, they're mostly plant-based. Everyone's mostly plant-based now. All diets around are like 70% plant-based, right? And the standard American diet is 70% plant-based as a product of calories. So, these areas, in fact, most of them ate more meat than the surrounding areas. But they said, oh, look how plant-based they are. They're 70% plant-based and they live longer. It's because of all the plants. But they don't actually compare. It's compared to what? As any economist will tell you, it's like compared to what? What are you comparing this? And in fact, comparing that to the surrounding populations that they're comparing life expectancy to, a lot of these places are eating more meat. Okinawa is a good example of that. You say, oh, Okinawa, they grow their own beets and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, they do. And they're not eating a lot of processed food, which is likely a good contributor to their longevity and their health. But they also eat a lot of pork, they eat a lot of pig, right? And so, in fact, they eat more meat on average than the average Japanese person with whom they compared life expectancy.
Interesting. Yeah.
So, it's always compared to what? And Loma Linda is the only population that is actually mostly, vegetarian sort of thing. And they live on average, several years longer than the average American. But the average American is eating highly processed, eating whole food. So that's a clear advantage already. And also, this is a religious population. This is the Seventh-day Adventists who are vegetarian by religion because their religion teaches that meat causes lustful feelings and is therefore evil. Okay, that is what they think, and that's the origins of the Seventh-day Adventists and Kellogg cereal. Dr. Kellogg was a Seventh-day Adventist and very much involved in that line of thinking, and this has influenced and shaped dietetics for the last century. They were actually the Seventh-day Adventists were one of the early founders of dietary nutrition in order to try and push their religious agenda on people. So they are very religious, and as such, a lot of these religious people, they very much frown on drinking, smoking, doing drugs, living, licentious behavior, and all these sorts of other high-risk behaviors that can increase your risk of all-cause mortality. If you look at Mormons in America, they have the exact same average increase in life expectancy. They don't have any dietary restrictions. They eat plenty of meat. They eat whatever they want, but they don't smoke. They don't drink. They don't involve themselves in these sorts of high-risk activities on average. Obviously, everyone's an individual, but on average, they sort of behave more appropriately and they live longer as a result of that. Same with Loma Linda. So there's a lot of confounding factors, and that's a problem with any epidemiological study, is that it's just rife with confounding factors. And the thing is too, is that, you know, any study, you never ever read the conclusion. You read the entire study and you make your own conclusions, because conclusions could be anything. The author of the Blue Zone report, I won't call it a study because it's not. They concluded that because these populations ate plants, that's what made them live longer. But if you look at their own data that they provided, that's clearly not the case. Most of these areas ate more meat, in fact, and then in the only Loma Linda ate less meat than their average population. And they had other reasons for living longer. And a blue zone that they don't put into their report is Hong Kong, which eats more meat per capita than any other population.
Right.
Has the longest life expectancy. I pointed this out to some rabid vegans, and they just got all upset. And they're like, oh well, they eat more meat than other populations, but they still eat 70, 65, 70% plants. And it's like, you're proving my point here. You're saying that more plants people eat, the shorter their lifespan. And they eat, the longer their lifespan. So thank you. Appreciate you making my point for me. So it's a bit silly, but these are very, 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 very contentious statements, and but people like to latch onto things that support their narrative, and it makes them think about feeling a certain way. But there was a study that came out last year that looked at 175 different countries, didn't just cherry pick 5 places, 175 different countries, corrected for socioeconomic change, people being rich or poor, having access to healthcare and medicines and all these sorts of things, corrected for as many of these things as they could. And they found that when people ate more meat, this was directly correlated with better health and longevity in 175 countries.
Yeah. That's super interesting. I believe that in most cases, the economic interests behind is what makes some news go mainstream, and other news or studies or reports, they just disappear and nobody actually never mentions them, right? So the economic interest is what is behind, and
Well, to your point, I heard a statistic the other day that was quite frightening, that Coca-Cola funds nutrition-based research to at the university level and beyond very heavily. So apparently Coca-Cola spends 11 times more on nutritional research than the NIH.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
So that and as we really know, what really history research has ever shown us is that whoever pays for the study generally has an outcome that favors patronage. So that's what we always see. Anything put out by the sugar companies or the drug companies or the tobacco companies will always favor those companies.
Yeah, and it should be illegal, right? Because it's really puts our health in danger.
It's difficult. I don't know if it should be illegal, because you can get these guys influencing the NIH and influencing all these, because they do. The pharmaceutical companies fund most of these the FDA gets 3/4 or 2/3 I think of its funding come from the drug companies, right? They have to pay so much money to get it FDA approved, And so they get 2/3 of their funding from the drug companies. So the drug companies have a lot of say over what happens. And so, you need people to be able to do independent research. And that goes for the companies themselves. They have an interest, and maybe they're doing something that's good. I mean, Coke isn't, but but something might be, and be like, hey, I think this is a good product. I'm going to put this out. But you're right. I mean, you should always take that with a grain of salt. And so it's very important to know where the money comes from. It's very important to know who funded the study,
Right.
to think about any implicit biases. The problem with those studies that the sugar companies funded back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and beyond is that they didn't disclose that they came from the sugar companies. That was academic malpractice, really, not disclosing their interests and their biases and conflicts of interest. They did not disclose that. They were saying, I'm purely doing this from an academic point of view, which was a lie. So, allowing people to do research, I think, is okay, but to look and know that, okay, well, that's from Coca-Cola. Obviously, they're going to say sugar is great.
And the majority of, most people, they have no idea who is actually behind the study, and that is perhaps the biggest issue here, right? That you're not skeptical enough.
Yeah, and it muddies the water too, because
Totally.
you'll have 30 papers that come out saying that, wow, fructose is bad, sugar is bad, and then companies will put out 30 other papers that say, it's not that bad. Nah, it's just the same as other carbs, and they say, well, I mean, it's inconclusive. What can we say? We have 30 papers saying this, 30 papers saying that. I guess we just need more research, and that's on purpose. That because if they did get that opposition research out there, then it wouldn't be that. And I think that that's something that we should be much more strict on. This peer review system used to be much robust. You didn't just just go through because you had some connections. You would put forth a study, you would do an experiment, and then someone else would try to replicate it. If it was not replicatable, it just said, we're not publishing this. This is crap. So we're not doing that anymore. We're just doing a study and saying, oh yeah, it's fine. No one's checking. No one's saying, okay, well, if I repeat it, do I get the same result? And that's something that I think we need to be more on top of.
Right. Our mental health as a society is alarming, right? With the numbers of depression and anxiety and other disorders rising. Do you think there is a connection between the modern diet and to this problematic?
Yeah, so I think that that can also be seen in that uptick in diseases, mental disorders have increased dramatically as well since the 1970s as well, since we changed this our health and our food recommendations. So mental diseases, major depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, OCD, even schizophrenia, these have been on the rise and in significant and alarming rates. Professor Chris Palmer from Harvard, professor of psychiatry at Harvard, has actually published a book called Brain Energy, which is very, very interesting. And he shows with ample references to the medical literature, the current literature, looking at schizophrenia, looking at mental state disorders and the mitochondria and metabolism, showing that these mental disorders are also metabolic diseases. As we know, we get a disruption of our metabolism from eating improperly. And so he has shown that when the mitochondria aren't functioning properly, or they're not numerous enough, they can't run your cell. It's really the mitochondria that sort of run the cell. He sort of shows this in his book, that they're sort of like the workers. And you have all these different organelles in your cell, and the mitochondria actually move around between each one, and they actually run like little machines. And so it's very interesting. So if they're moving a bit slow, or they're getting there a bit late and they're not able to produce as much energy, a day late and a dollar short, and it doesn't work as well. And this has compounding effects, because you have thousands or even hundreds of thousands of mitochondria in a cell or in a neuron, and you have hundreds of billions to trillions of neurons, just neurons, right? And so when that starts breaking down, you get serious problems. And then we see this manifest as psychiatric disorders, among other things. And so he shows that when you fix the metabolism, that you can actually fix mental disorders. Yeah, even as much as schizophrenia. So by putting them on a ketogenic diet, this is a major way of fixing the metabolism, and specifically the mitochondria, because there are studies showing that if you're in ketosis, people know about autophagy, the cells replacing themselves, but they also replace the different organelles within the cell, like the mitochondria. So it's called mitophagy. So it's older mitochondria that are just sort of old and crusty, and they break them down, recycle them for parts, make new ones, right? They're younger, more vibrant, and able to bounce around and zip around the cell and do their job. And you actually it actually stimulates the production of more mitochondria as well. So not only are your mitochondria more active, but they're also more numerous, and so get a better job done as well. So after a few months in ketosis, you find that you'll have about 4 times as many mitochondria, and they're 4 times as effective. So this is a massive compounding.
It's massive.
Extra mitochondria, and he finds that addressing the metabolism and putting people on a ketogenic diet or a carnivore diet, which is a subset of ketogenic diets, just removing all the rest of the plants as well, can actually reverse and cure psychiatric disorders like schizophrenia, and generally only about 10% of people respond to medications and therapy and traditional treatments for these psychiatric disorders. It's not good. And he's finding he's getting a much better result with just these metabolic therapies. Yeah, and Dr. Georgia Ede, she's also a psychiatrist, and I believe she's in Boston, and she is also of this line of thinking, and she's producing studies and trials along, as is Dr. Palmer. But she published a study just last year looking at 32 extremely unwell people with schizophrenia, bipolar, OCD, major depression that were institutionalized. These guys were refractory to all traditional treatments. And just by putting them on a ketogenic diet, they found that every single one improved, every single one, and none of them improved with standard care before that. So that's very good news.
It is, yeah. This has been so interesting, really. I think we've covered basically all the topics that I wanted to talk with you about. Is there anything that you would like to add to what we've talked about?
Well, I think that whatever people take away from this, just recognize that the things that we eat have a much greater impact on our life and our health than have been told or that we thought. And we are animals, and as all animals in nature, we have a specific diet. All animals in nature have a very specific species appropriate diet. That applies to us as well. We are animals, and the same rules apply to us. Even though we live in houses and we have religion and science and all these sorts of things, these biological rules are fundamental. And so whatever our natural diet is, it is something. And the closer we get to our natural biologically appropriate diet, the better we're going to be. Our biology is designed to eat a very specific thing, just like all animals. Cows just eat grass, lions just eat meat, and when they go away from that, they get sick, and they get all these diseases that's have names for. We need to recognize that's happening to us as well. And so I think that people should look at what we traditionally ate, what we were eating 1,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago, to get an idea of what we should be eating today. Because whatever we eat, the things that we're eating now, the plants that we're eating now, they didn't even exist 50,000 years ago. So I don't think that we can argue that that's it. And if something hasn't existed 100 years ago, I really wouldn't ever eat it.
So Anthony, is there where can people find you?
So I'm pretty active on social media. I have my own YouTube channel. It's just Anthony Chaffee MD, and that's where I put out all of my videos and shorts and things like that. And I have a podcast just called The Plant Free MD,
and that has the audio version of my longer podcast as well. And then I'm on Instagram and other things as just Anthony Chafee, MD. And there's like a link tree on my Instagram and links on that they can find me elsewhere. But yeah, those are the main ones.
We'll add that to this podcast as well. Thank you so much. It's been interesting. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah,
Australia
well, thank you
soon.
very much for having me. Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. It was lovely meeting you all.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Hunger for Change podcast with Anthony Chafee. This was our first episode. I would appreciate any feedback from you since I'm quite new to this and I want to make sure it's interesting to all of you. I also wanted to take a moment to talk about Naturally, my brand of healthy food products. At Naturally, we are on a mission to change the world through what we eat. This is why we worked so hard to make products that are delicious and also good for you. They're all gluten-free and have no refined sugar. My personal favorites are the cheesy snacks, chocolates, and cacao hazelnut spread. We also have kale chips, granolas, nut bars, nut butters, and protein powders, as well as many cool snacks to be released this year. At the moment, Naturally is only available in Europe. You can head over to our website, naturally.com, and it will take you to our online store. If you're in Italy, Portugal, Germany, Poland, France, the Netherlands, or Sweden, you can find them in Amazon. Search for Naturally. I will leave all of these links in the description anyway, so that you can find them. Thank you so much for listening and stay tuned for the next episode.